Today we're going to continue our NHL offseason plan series, and we're taking a look at the 21st ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the Minnesota Wild. They're a team that's already gotten a head start to the offseason. What else should we expect from them before the start of next year? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned today, we're continuing on with our off-season plan series where we take a look at the last season's results, what contracts are coming due for each team, what kind of cap space do they have to work with, and what kind of trades or signings should we expect from this team here moving forward. First up, we're going to do a quick recap here of the 1920 season, take a look at the contracts that are coming due, their cap space, and obviously take a look here at what moves they've already made and what we expect them to do here going forward. So the Minnesota Wild finished the 1920 season with a record of 35, 27, and 7 for 77 points. They did get to go to the 24-team bubble play-in series. They did unfortunately lose to the Vancouver Canucks in the qualifying round, so technically they did not qualify for the 2020 NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs. Now, as you can see here as well, the Minnesota Wild scored 220 goals, and they also allowed 220 goals, so they had a goal differential of 0. They were even in that regard. Obviously, they were not pleased with their goaltending this year. They didn't get some big saves and timely ones when they needed it most. GM Bill Guerin already has expressed that publicly in media interviews that they want to make some changes in that regard. Overall, they could certainly use some more scoring as well, so they certainly have some work to do on both sides of the puck to make their team a better hockey team next year. Taking a look at their special teams. Now, we have them on a power play, actually pretty solid, a 21.3 conversion rate for 11th best in the NHL, but their penalty killing was not so great, 77.2 for 25th best overall in the NHL. So the Wild certainly had up and down kind of season, certainly not what they were hoping for, but at the same time, I know from my perspective, not shocked. I really have said for a long time, I felt this team needed to go through a bit of a rebuild, but that doesn't seem to be the full direction that the Bill Guerin has taken them down. It's more of a retool, a shake-up, but he certainly has made it clear he plans to make changes. Now, the Minnesota Wild have $11.9 million in cap space, and that gives them 19 players under contract for next season. So overall, they do have some cap flexibility, and they do have some more ways they can kind of shed some salary if need be here as well. Now, let's take a look at their contract situation. Who do they have for UFAs and RFAs coming up this offseason? Now, as you can see, for RFAs, they have 3 players, and I do expect all of them to get contracts. We have Jordan Greenway, Nico Sturm, and Luke Kunin. I suspect that they'll all get contracts. I'm not sure exactly what kind of term we're looking at. We could see bridge deals possibly for all 3 players or shorter term contracts. Greenway's a player I could see maybe be traded as well. I mean, it's hard to say what they see for him as a role moving forward, but he's a big, strong forward who could find more opportunity on another team. So he's a player I would look out for as a potential trade bait. I don't have any rumors to suggest that he is being shopped or anything, but it's a player that I would look out for in that regard. From the UFA standpoint, we have Carson Soucy, Mikko Koivu, and Alex Galchenyuk. Now, of course, Mikko Koivu is rumored to retire here. Bill Guerin has basically so far, up to now, when I'm recording this at least, has basically refused to comment on his future. It's not quite clear if they even want to consider re-signing him. Many believe that the Wild have told him that they're not interested in bringing him back, but I can't confirm that 100%. And of course, we don't know if Koivu wants to play or not. So at this point, I'm saying that Koivu is about 99.9% not returning to the Wild, but that's based on what we're hearing at this point. And it's also known that Alex Galchenyuk is likely not going to be offered a contract by the Wild either. Bill Guerin did make note of that in a recent interview, indicating that Galchenyuk likely would be going to free agency and not returning to the Minnesota Wild. So a few players there that are not expected back. Soucy, out of the 3, is expected to get a deal to re-sign. Probably a shorter-term contract would be my guess for him. Let's take a quick look here at what moves Guerin's already done in this brief offseason we've already been in for the Wild, and what else we expect him to do here going forward. Now, of course, one of the first things he did was acquire big center iceman Nick Bjugstad from his former team that he used to work for, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They only had to give up a conditional 7th-round pick to make that acquisition, and essentially a bit of a cap dump for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh also retained half of his salary, so the Wild get a relatively inexpensive, low-risk move on a one-year contract, basically, for Bukestad. If he can get his career back on track, he's gone through a lot of injuries. Obviously, he's a big guy, has a lot of potential that he's just really never completely fulfilled. So we'll see if this works out. The Wild are certainly in need of guys who can play the center ice position. He can do that, but he's probably at best a third-line center for them right now. So we'll see what happens here, but that was one of the first moves that Guerin made. Of course, he followed that up with a big signing one of their top defensemen, Jonas Brodin, to a big 7-year contract extension at $6 million per year. So that's a total of $42 million, and he gave him a no-move clause in the first 4 years as well as year number 7. So that kind of forces them to have Brodin, Ryan Suter, and Jared Spurgeon, three of their top 4 defensemen, all with no-move clauses, which will certainly impact the expansion draft for Seattle. Clearly, there's been a lot of rumblings around Matt Dumba here ever since, which we'll get into in a second. But obviously, this team is going to continue to be busy. Guerin has made it known that he wants to make changes, and he's going to make a lot of them. Now, of course, we also saw another change, one that was a little bit of a confusing one most people really never saw coming, where he traded center iceman Eric Stahl to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Marcus Johansson. That was a 1-for-1 deal. They both have 1 year left on their contract. Stahl's making a little bit less money than Johansson, so they are taking on a little extra salary in that regard. Johansson is 5 years younger, though, and he did play center with Buffalo last year. Even though I personally don't think that worked out very well, it wasn't a great experiment, and I really think he's better as a winger. But head coach Dean Evison knows him from their days in Washington together, feels like he can be a center. That's kind of the comments that we received after the trade, indicating that they do intend to use him in that regard. So I think personally it's going to depend on what other moves they make. It is possible Johansson could still find himself on the wing, but it depends on how successful Guerin is finding other people who can play center ice. Now, of course, their search here really is for ideally a number 1 center, or somebody who can be like a 1-2 that can kind of platoon with somebody else, but preferably a solid number 1 is really what they're looking for here, and that's where the Matt Dumba trade talk comes in. Now, based on expansion draft rules, like I said, you can either protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goalie, which is the format most teams will go with, or you can protect 8 skaters total, which will allow you to do a 4th defenseman for teams that are really deep on the blue line. But it means you're going to expose many more forwards that way, and most teams won't go with that method. And obviously, Dumba would be the odd man out if they went the 7-3-1 method. So obviously, they're not going to do that. They're not going to let Seattle take a strong player like that. So they're going to obviously trade him to improve other areas of the team. Now, Minnesota's made it clear that they need a top center, but they also want change in goal. So obviously this is a team, like I said, Guerin's going to be a very busy guy. Devin Dubnyk likely does not return. Dubnyk's either traded or bought out. Stalock is debatable if he returns. It's a possibility because they do need a backup goalie. He's got 1 year left on his contract, but obviously they have Kakinen down in the minors who could come up and take on that role as well. So it is possible they could have a completely different goaltending tandem next year, but I think there's a small chance Stalock comes back, but it really boils down to what they can find here, because ultimately Stalock's contract's pretty easy to move. It's not overly expensive. He played a fair bit in the return to play against the Canucks and didn't look too bad, but certainly an area that Guerin still wants to improve upon. They've been linked to guys like Matt Murray in Pittsburgh and other goaltenders as well that are going to be available via trade. So the Minnesota Wild, I think, are rumored to be looking for a center for Dumba, but they could change their mind if they can't get that and go after a really good starting goaltender. It's possible they could go either direction here, in my opinion. If you look around the NHL, which we've talked about here on the channel a few different times in the past couple of days, there's the teams that are linked to him the most that want Dumba are teams like the Winnipeg Jets, the Calgary Flames, even the Leafs to an extent. But they all would probably want to offer preferably somebody who's a scoring winger in return, not that big center iceman that they so desperately need. So Guerin might change his mind on that and decide to go for a top goalie instead, depending on what he can get out there. There's certainly some good ones that are rumored to be available for trade, but I guess it just depends on what deal they find. But Matt Dumba is certainly a player that we know likely will not be back. Now, besides the moves that we've already seen in the Matt Dumba trade, there is a potential few other things we could see from the Minnesota Wild. Obviously, some veteran guys like Zach Parise and Matt Zuccarello could find themselves on the move as well. I mean, we did have rumors that at the deadline that Parise was really close to being traded to the Islanders in exchange for Andrew Ladd. It was kind of, a swap of bad contracts, but there was other pieces involved as well. I don't know if they'll revisit that. I just know that Parise is getting later in his career and had expressed to the Wild his desire to maybe go to another team to try to be on more of a contending team to get a Stanley Cup before his career was over. He's battled a lot of injuries, and clearly, it's not that he doesn't like it in Minnesota, but he was just kind of getting tired of not, being contenders, I guess. So we'll see if they revisit that, and it's also been known that really, I know the Zuccarello contract was signed by Paul Fenton. Of course, Fenton, not long after, was gone, and it's believed that others in the organization weren't overly fond of the contract, that they felt they gave him too much term and money for his age. And, last year wasn't the greatest for Zuccarello in Minnesota. Not going to say for sure that he gets traded, but it is certainly a possibility that a player that I believe they would entertain moving on from. So besides those two vets, like I said, there's a good chance Dubba goes, a good chance we don't see Devin Dubnyk come back. Who the goalie is next year is debatable. Like I said, there's rumor that they're looking at Matt Murray. They could go into free agency as well. There's lots of goalies that are out there that could find themselves available. So we will see what happens, but I do expect Bill Guerin to be one of the busier GMs. He's, like I said before, leading into this year, he's going to make his mark on the team next offseason, really shake things up. Obviously, this team has underperformed long enough. It's time to see some significant change, and he's certainly already in progress of making that happen. So let me know which players you think are going to get moved out and what moves you expect to see from Guerin in the Wild for the remainder of this offseason. Let me know your thoughts down below and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.